Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International. We are the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. In 2018, we wrote a declaration on women's sex-based rights, which lays out our position and has been signed by 39,054 people from 160 countries, and it's supported by 542 organisations. We are a large network of activists, including country contacts from many countries and every continent. And do join us if you want to. We have a website, www.womensdeclaration.com, and have a look on that website. Today, we have Megan Blake from Australia, and Megan Blake is going to talk about WDI's campaign challenging the United Nations to keep sex, not gender, in the wording and meaning in the forthcoming general recommendation on Article 5 of CEDAW on stereotypes. So we've sent a submission explaining our position to CEDAW experts, and Megan will explain that to us. Then we're going to hear from Margherita Rubin from Russia. She's going to tell us about lesbian feminism in Russia, and I very luckily have seen her PowerPoint already, and I'm very, very excited because it's fantastic, and it's going to be really interesting to hear about that. So thank you so much for coming. And Margherita's speaking second. And then we're going to hear from Hatchet, who is co-founder of the 1205 campaigning movement organisation, which has only just begun, but has done some unbelievably excellent actions already. And we're going to hear about what they are doing, what they've done, and what the plans are, and some protests about the Afghanistan cricket situation. So a range of different things from Jean. And Jean will go third. So Megan Blake has a degree in law and a PhD in hermeneutics and interpretation. She has worked in policy research and project management and has taught at school and university. Megan's advocacy work has focused on women's rights and refugee support. She's currently working with the Feminist Legal Clinic and groups including Sex-Based Rights Australia, and on the WDI UN working group, a sort of key member. So thank you so much, Megan, for coming to explain this, and over to you.
On the 6th of December, WDI emailed members of the CEDAW committee regarding its upcoming consideration of General Recommendation 41 on, it says, gender stereotypes. So we asked that it return to the language of sex and sex role stereotyping as found in CEDAW itself, rather than the language of gender. So this echoes Article 1 of the WDI Declaration that the rights of women are based upon the category of sex. So in talking about this, I'm going to cover some of the same ground as I did in November when talking about the Office of the Prosecutor developing its new policy on gender persecution. So the CEDAW General Recommendation 41 on gender stereotypes has been a few years in the making, and it's slated for discussion in 2025 and 2026. So the committee agreed at its 81st session in February 2022 to start elaboration of GR41 on the impact of gender stereotypes on the enjoyment of the rights enshrined in the CEDAW Convention, and it published a concept note of 20 pages on its principles, language, and content. A half day of general discussion on that concept note has been scheduled for the 17th of February this year, organised by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights as part of CEDAW's 90th session in Geneva. The concept note names GR41 the General Recommendation on Gender Stereotypes. It lumps together a reference to, quote, sex or gender, or sex-based and gender-based roles or stereotypes 5 times in 20 pages. So it puts them together, sex and gender, 5 times. It refers to the two sexes using that word twice, and it does refer to sex role stereotypes twice. However, it refers exclusively to gender stereotypes 161 times in 20 pages, including in the title of the recommendation and in its definitions discussion. So I think we can conclusively say that it has replaced the language of sex with the language of gender, occasionally, so 5 times, lumping them together as though they're two separate but related concepts. The problem is the rest of the time gender is used, it's as though it's synonymous with the phrase sex role. Only this is never actually spelt out, and it's never explained why both are used sometimes, as in sex or gender, if they are in fact synonymous. Or if they're not synonymous, then what is the difference? Or how does the usage of them interact with the definitions of gender, such as that given in the Rome Statute? This is, of course, by now par for the course. So the term gender was used in international law prior to the Rome Statute, but the Rome Statute, I believe, was the first UN document to actually define the term. So the Rome Statute was written in 1998 and it came into force in 2002. It established 4 key international crimes, including crimes against humanity, and it also established the International Criminal Court. So its definition of gender was the deliberate result of what we call constructive ambiguity. So constructive ambiguity is a diplomatic use of deliberately ambiguous words to give comfort to parties on different sides of a debate in order to promote agreement and get them all to sign the thing, but without expressly giving either party the outcome they want at the expense of the other. So that's how the Rome Statute arrived at its definition of gender. So the Rome Statute defines gender in this way. It says, for the purposes of this statute, it is understood that the term gender refers to the two sexes, male and female, within the context of society. So it's talking about the social existence or experience or construction of sex, not sex itself. But it doesn't say that in really clear, unambiguous terms. The statute doesn't list sex as a separate ground, but in 2014, the Office of the Prosecutor Policy for the implementation of the Rome Statute, itself based on the WHO's definitions, describes sex as the biological and physiological characteristics that define men and women. The policy paper then defines gender as the socially constructed roles, behaviours, activities, and attributes that a given society considers appropriate for men and women. And it explains it really clearly. It says, to put it another way, male and female are sex categories, while masculine and feminine are gender categories. Aspects of sex will not vary substantially between different human societies, while aspects of gender may vary greatly. So there's no one agreed definition of sex versus gender across the whole of the United Nations, but these ones are the most commonly repeated ones or versions thereof. UN Women, for instance, defines gender as the social attributes and opportunities associated with being male and female, and the relationships between women and men and girls and boys, as well as the relations between women and those between men. It does this, but it still posts in support of trans lesbians on International Lesbian Day. In General Recommendation number 28 from 2010, the CEDAW committee itself says that sex refers to biological differences between men and women, while gender refers to socially constructed identities, attributes, and roles for women and men and society's social and cultural meaning for these biological differences. And that this results in hierarchical relationships between women and men, and in the distribution of power and rights favouring men and disadvantaging women. So, Two main problems arise here. The first one, the usage of gender in UN documents like GR 41, the concept note, doesn't map to these relatively sensible definitions. As we see in documents like the concept note, sex and gender are ambiguously the same thing, but also somehow different. And gender is now effectively replacing sex entirely. Second problem, the definitions, while relatively sensible, are still fuzzy and open to exploitation with some plausible deniability. The definition of gender in the Rome Statute literally wouldn't have been agreed to and adopted by the diverse states if it had not been an effective example of constructive ambiguity. So WGI has asked the committee, the CEDAW committee, to reject the term gender stereotypes and return to the language of sex stereotypes or sex role stereotypes as written in the convention itself and agreed to by the 189 member states. The convention, CEDAW, uses the language of sex 3 times in its text. Firstly, the preamble declares that all humans are born free and equal in dignity and rights without distinction, quote, based on sex. Article 1 defines discrimination as any distinction, exclusion, or restriction made on the basis of sex. And Article 5 is named sex role stereotyping in the Convention's own table of contents. The text of Part A of this article clarifies the meaning. It puts an obligation on states to modify the social and cultural patterns of conduct of men and women with a view to achieving the elimination of prejudices and customary and all other practices which are based on the idea of the inferiority or the superiority of either of the sexes or on stereotyped roles for men and women. These social and cultural patterns described in Article 5 are what are termed gender in the Rome Statute. It's therefore an ambiguous misnomer to refer to gender stereotypes, as gender itself is the agreed term for those stereotypes. Sex role stereotypes, as described in Article 5, are what the general recommendation seems mostly to be directed at, however. They're just not calling it that. Paragraph 15 of the concept note says that the CEDAW committee to date has not defined gender stereotypes. It says, according to renowned scholars and the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, the term gender stereotypes refers to a generalized view, belief, or preconception of attributes or characteristics that are or ought to be possessed by, or the roles that are or should be performed by men and women. The reference to men and women here is clear, as is the implied division between the underlying quality, maleness or femaleness, and the social construction or expectation layered on top of that quality. Paragraph 27 notes that both the CEDAW committee and the Committee on the Rights of the Child have emphasised the deeply rooted nature of harmful practices, attributing their existence to prevailing social attitudes that view women and girls as inferior to men and boys based on stereotyped roles. The multi-dimensional causes of these harmful practices encompass, they say, stereotyped sex and gender-based roles, and perceived superiority or inferiority of both sexes, among other reasons. So the reference to both sexes here refutes the ideology of non-binary sex and actually contradicts recent judicial commentary and legislative amendment in countries like Australia that there are not only two sexes, where references, for example, to the opposite sex were replaced in the Australian Sex Discrimination Act with the phrase a different sex. And this change was noted by the Parliament to be specifically in reference to there being more than only two sexes. So member states to CEDAW are already going further than the language of the UN instruments. The general recommendation, even in clause 33, gives a sex role example, saying, for instance, this can occur, discrimination, through a constitutional provision that reinforces stereotypes of women as caregivers and homemakers, a judicial ruling not grounded in law or fact, but rather on sexual stereotypes related to rape, or school textbooks that expressly reinforce sex role stereotypes concerning appropriate occupations for men and women. So, why is GR 41 using the term gender almost exclusively if the convention to which it relates only uses the word sex, if the use of the word gender is circular, and the recommendation itself seems to intend the meaning of sex role stereotypes? It seems to be some combination of catering to ideological demands and perhaps not thinking carefully enough about the consequences. So, gender, as noted expressly and favourably by member states in discussions of its use, is a highly elastic term that allows states a lot of latitude in its application. Sex, on the other hand, as we know, is not. It is a quality that can be observed in material reality, and it remains consistent across time and culture. Because of its elasticity, states can use the term gender in law and policy to avoid granting protection on the basis of sex, and instead to privilege the gender stereotype with which an individual identifies. This reifies and protects the oppressive stereotype, not the material sexed body underneath. Women are oppressed on the basis of this body by the very stereotypes being protected by the word gender. As the WGI Declaration says, the concept of gender identity makes socially constructed stereotypes which organise and maintain women's inequality into essential and innate conditions, thereby undermining women's sex-based rights. Because of the added layer of the United Nations' own conflation of the terms sex and gender, member states are similarly interpreting and applying the word sex to actually mean gender, as in the socially constructed roles and stereotypes to which a person lends themselves or that they seek to occupy legally determines their sex. The recent matter of For Women Scotland and the Scottish ministers in the UK asked the question of whether a gender recognition certificate determines a person's sex for the purposes of the Equality Act. In other words, whether the Gender Recognition Act creates an interpretive obligation to read references to sex in law as actually meaning certificated sex rather than actual sex, biological sex. It asked the Supreme Court, when we say sex in law, do we really mean sex or do we really mean legal gender? Australia has addressed this same question and so far has answered it yes, but with no certificate even needed. In the 2024 case of Tickle and Giggle, the Federal Sex Discrimination Commissioner, I honestly, intervened to submit to the federal court the following. The Sex Discrimination Commissioner said, the Commissioner submits that the word sex is not a biological concept, referring to whether a person at birth had male or female physical traits, nor is it a binary concept limited to the male or female sex, and is also broad enough to encompass the idea that a person's sex can be changed. The Commissioner refuted the distinction pled by Giggle between sex and gender, that sex refers to biological features, while gender relates to the social context. So essentially, Giggle pled a version of the distinction claimed by many international documents and UN instruments such as the Rome Statute. This was rejected by the Australian Human Rights Commission and Sex Discrimination Commissioner, and sex was said to be determined by a person's expressed gender. The federal court ruled in favour of the Sex Discrimination Commissioner. The judgment of the federal court outlined the meaning of sex under the law. It said, first, sex is not confined to being a biological concept, referring to whether a person at birth had male or female physical traits, nor confined to being a binary concept, limited to the male or female sex, but rather takes a broader ordinary meaning, informed by its use, including in state and territory legislation. Part of this ordinary meaning and part of the legal recognition was the treatment and application of the terms sex and gender under international law, just like this. So Article 2 of CEDAW calls on all member states to take all appropriate measures, including legislation, to modify or abolish existing laws, regulations, customs, and practices which constitute discrimination against women. However, use by the committee of the term gender is one mechanism by which member states are undercutting their Article 2 mandate. It is the illogical and ideological employment of the term gender that is permitting this. On the 2nd of December last year, Reem Al-Salem, the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, published an informal statement on X.com expressing her concern with this trend. She said, "I am very concerned by the increasing onslaught on women-specific language, which seeks to erase the reality of womanhood itself and deny its innate and sex-related specificity." A number of influential media outlets, organizations, academic and health institutions, and experts are complicit in what can only be described as a new form of violence against women. It must be stated that words such as non-transgender women, cis women, and the like do not reflect any UN or otherwise internationally agreed standards. If the CEDAW committee endorses the term gender stereotypes in GR 41, it will further license this contemporary fad of ignoring the reality of the sexed body. It will undermine protections for girls and women on the basis of their sex, and it will unwittingly participate in the reification of the oppressive sex role stereotypes that the Rome Statute terms gender and that CEDAW and the general recommendation are supposedly committed to eliminating. So WDI has therefore asked that the committee use its 2025 deliberations to rename GR 41 using the internationally agreed term sex role stereotypes, and it will submit further to the OHCHR February 17th discussion with the same request. There is an online submission form if any sister or organisation would like to do the same. The deadline is the 10th of February. Thanks very much, Jo.
How can we most effectively influence the CEDAW experts and other UN policymakers?
I wish I knew. I know that CEDAW experts are meant to be independent. They're not meant to be representatives of the states that they come from. But I do think, just as a human factor, if you do have a seat like Natasha Stott-Despoja is on the CEDAW committee and she's from Australia, she's a former politician. I do think that you possibly have more ability to, speak the same language as a committee member from your state, if you do have one from your state. I think that for me, I don't know. I think that for me, one important thing is showing them how their implementation is undercutting their own mandate. You're meant to be doing this. This is what you want to achieve. This is the, the language of the aims. But by using this framing, look at the effect that you're having and showing the inconsistency between those things. So it's like the definition of sex is meant to be clear, but because of this increasing confusion, even the definition of sex is being undercut by member states. How, in this particular example, are the rights of women being protected? Like, how is that mandate being fulfilled? But I'm a very kind of like I'm a very give me the facts, show me the logic of it person. It's not necessarily going to work for everyone. Like I know, um, is it Bandana Rana? She's heading up the sub kind of committee looking at GR 41, and I just don't get the impression from a lot of her communications and her Facebook page and stuff that that's how she approaches it necessarily. She seems to be more interpersonal, kind of social. So it's hard to say. But I do think we have so many cases nowadays from around the world where the rights of women have been undercut because of this problem, and they are empirical evidence that the mandate is not being fulfilled. And a lot of the time, it can be connected to the language that is used in the law, which is connected to, we can see, to the language that is used in the international instruments, whether or not they're binding law in your country, because I know that different countries, international treaties don't all have the same legal status. Like in Australia, they're not law, for example. But America, one of the reasons America won't sign a lot of things is because they are, so I think it depends on your country as well.
Our next speaker is Margherita Rubin, and she is from Russia. So Margherita is 20 years old. She works as a programmer in Russia, and to this moment, she's the leader of a group of lesbian feminists in her city, Yekaterinburg in Central Ural. She's been a feminist activist for 3 years, and to be honest, activism is the whole point of Margherita's life, she says. So thank you so much, and over to you, Margherita.
Hello, everybody. Today I will speak about lesbian feminism in Russia, and I should notice that my presentation is expanding my speech, so I recommend you to look at it while I speak. First of all, it should be noted that the history of women's liberation in Russia is not consistent. Due to weak generation connections between generations, the women's movement often forgets its own experience and history. Therefore, 3-4 years is usually enough to set the progress back where it started. Young women come not knowing what the women in the movement did before them. This is perhaps the main characteristic of our history. After the collapse of USSR, the women's liberation movement had to start from the beginning. In the 19th, women created non-government organizations, participated in politics, and worked with Western foundations, for example, Swiss anti-trafficking organizations. As of 2004, there were more than 1,500 women's organizations educating and helping women. Around 2010, with the explosion of social media and the translation of second-wave feminist books to Russian, feminism started gaining popularity. There were books of Andrea Dworkin, Adrienne Rich, Marilyn Fry, Sheila Jeffers, Valerie Solanas, Shalomit Firestone, and others. Around 2016, Lyubov Kalugina and her comrades began the campaign to popularize political lesbianism, which was successful despite pushback. A lot of political lesbian communities were created, and a lot of women have rejected their compulsory heterosexuality and became lesbians. There were also offline events and discussion groups about political lesbianism and attempts to create women's communes. The growing government repression forced a lot of lesbian feminists to leave the country and caused the remaining activists to abandon the main online platform. In 2022, most political lesbian communities have either closed or moved to other platforms, such as Telegram. So, what we have now? The way radical feminist communities function and organize themselves is hindered by the high degree of atomization in modern Russian society. As a result, Telegram has a lot of private blogs and chats which exist either isolated from each other or in the state of ideological disagreement. TikTok and Twitter are also responsible for popularizing radical feminism in Russia. However, the issue with those platforms that it often confuses liberal and radical ideas, which leads to conflict between lesbian feminists and others. Political lesbianism can be considered pretty popular in general. Nevertheless, the Russian radical feminist community is highly active, even if mostly restricted to online activism. Some radical feminist groups have thousands of members. There are a lot of lesbian feminist groups as well, but they are less popular, ranging from tens to hundreds of members. Offline activist groups are typically small, but they exist even as far as Siberia. It's important to note that Marxist and communist ideas are popular in post-Soviet countries. Since the war in Ukraine, Marxist ideas became even more popular among radical feminists. There are even communities that confuse feminism and socialism so much that they consider socialist revolution to be the main goal of women's liberation movement. The women that join the political lesbian community are mostly very young. On the slide, you can see the results of the poll, where 210 women took part. Most of them are 70 to 21 years old. A third are 22 to 27 years old, and there is a small number of teenagers younger than 16 and women older than 30. Also, because Russia is a multinational country, lesbian feminism includes not only Slavic women, but also women of Caucasian and Siberian nationalities. Despite the high level of atomization and a lot of ideological conflicts, there exists a lesbian feminist culture which expresses itself through memes and works of art. Now I want to show you some examples of it. This is one of the most favorite memes in the community. This is the reference to a catchphrase of a god in video game Skyrim. Once I was Hitler too, but then I became a rat femme. Being a lesbian isn't your choice, it's mine. You're a lesbian now. This meme was created because we tired of women rejecting lesbian vision. This meme is about system thinking. The women on the meme disagree that the system of patriarchy just should be fixed, and she agrees that we have to destroy the whole system. And this is my favorite meme. Yekaterinburg is a capital of lesbian feminism. Yekaterinburg is a city in Russia, and we made it because there was a group of lesbian feminists, and we are pretty active. And now some examples of political lesbians art in Russia. Family friendship is the basis of fighting against the male supremacy. This was made for Vesnitsa in 2020. This is the painting I made for Radical Feminist art book. We made in 2023. Women uproot the patriarchy. This drawing was created specially for lesbian feminist community Lesanki in 2024. And this was created specially for radical feminist community rat meetings. This community help women find each other and find new connections. And now about political situation in Russia and our main problems. Russian feminism is different from the Western one in a lot of ways due to a different government agenda. Russian society is still mostly influenced by the classic patriarchy. The issues women face also depend on region. For example, there are Muslim republics in Russia where women face particularly harsh treatment. Trans ideology is not enforced by the government and is merely an online annoyance. The main problems are access to abortions, domestic violence, If you know, domestic violence has been decriminalized in Russia, lesbophobia, and radical conservative values. The main obstacle for Russian feminists and activists is our oppressive government. For more than 10 years now, we as feminists have been living in a constant fear, with the restrictions our government imposes on our freedom of speech getting worse every day. Let me illustrate. In 2014, LGBT propaganda was banned among minors. You have probably heard about it. By banning non-traditional sexual relationships, Russia has set its course on traditional conservative values. Recently, in 2023, our Supreme Court declared LGBT as an extremist organization. Our authorities have declared a lot of things they don't like as extremist or anti-tradition propaganda. A few months ago, our parliament banned child-free propaganda too. So in Russia, it's terrorism to be a lesbian or to spread the idea that it's normal not to want to have kids. For things such as merely speaking about being lesbian, about choosing lesbianism, about living for your own enjoyment, unmarried and without kids, you may be forced to pay a fine, put in jail, be fired, or expelled. Neither Neither in social networks nor in science, I mean sociology, universities, education, art, books, songs, movies, and even with your classmates, colleagues, neighbors, and parents, you can't always be honest about being lesbian. However, the law is not universally enforced, and this is the reason why me, my friends, and our community of lesbian feminists in Russia is still there. But there is a constant risk since we are silenced on federal level. The law enforcers don't come for everyone, but they come for someone, so you never know who is going to be next. In 2018, they arrested and tried to accuse a feminist and one of the first political lesbian activists in Russian internet, Lyubov Kalugina, of man-hating, which is a criminal offense, for memes on her social media account. On the slide is some information about her case. The persecution had lasted for 3 years, and she left the country as she did feminist activism. They also came for Julia Tsvetkova, info is on a slide. She was arrested for illegal production and traffic of porno. Her artworks, Vagina's Monologues, was used as a proof. And you can see on a slide this paintings is what our government think porno is. They came twice for Tatiana Sukharova in 2014, and then she even spent several months in jail, and recently after her protest against ban on child-free propaganda. So she also left the country. And a lot of feminists have left the country too since the war in Ukraine. And now the political situation is only going to get worse and worse. Our authorities spend a lot of effort suppressing protest moods. They especially devote a large amount of resources to the law enforcement to protect themselves from the people. In Russia, the emphasis is on the ideological agenda of conservative values, and even though the restrictive laws are against the constitution of Russian Federation, this does not stop them from what they are doing. Other post-USSR countries such as Belarus and Kazakhstan have similar problems. So yes, we have autocracy issues here. However, it doesn't stop feminists. All kinds of feminist activists use all the tools available to them. Here we tell you about the types of feminist activism which are prevalent in Russia. Currently, in Russia, there are about 14 non-government organizations that provide legal and psychological aid for women as well as shelter for violence victims. In addition, there are also a number of unofficial groups that help women. For example, as a response to the laws that made access to abortions more difficult, the Emergency Contraception Fund was created to provide free contraception to every woman who needs it. The founder runs a Telegram blog where she spreads news about reproductive rights and the truth about contraception, pregnancy, and childbirth. Some activists and groups translate feminist literature and distribute it using public and private blogs, making important text more accessible to wider audience. The blogs have 3 to 10,000 of followers. Russian feminists actively record and distribute podcasts on different platforms, using them as a tool of education and support. In these podcasts, they discuss women's rights, pressing social issues, and read excerpts from feminist literature. The most well-known feminist podcasts are A Room of One's Own and FemTalks. Activist groups such as Little Sisters hold lectures about women's rights. Some women organize online and offline feminist reading groups. Activists also run educational blogs where they share their knowledge and raise important social issues, promoting the feminist ideas and bringing new women into feminism. Some activist groups hold women's events and parties such as New Year and Halloween celebrations and create communities that help women find and meet each other. And what about our plans? Different lesbian feminists have different visions of the future. Some aim to create feminist political parties and to gradually subdue the democratic institutions to advance their interests. Some dream of revolution and military coup, which is certainly inspired by the communist sentiment, which is popular in post-Soviet territories, as I said before. What are our plans as a group of lesbian feminists? Well, our main goal is to survive. Today, we're trying to recover and preserve the experience of feminists that came before us because it's vitally important and nothing will change if we let them be forgotten. We're trying to expand our community and befriend other feminist communities without harming our lesbian vision. Personally, I would say that as lesbian feminists, we should aim to create possibilities for women. If the main principles of radical feminism are to choose women, to advance genocentrism and lesbianism, then without creating possibilities for women and making these ideas reality, we will remain in powerless stagnation. To create opportunities, one should accumulate human and financial resources. For example, we as women are more inclined to choose humanitarian sciences and careers, which is why it's so easy to find a female psychologist, teacher, and designer, and why it's so difficult to find a woman who can fix your washing machine, help with house repairs, teach you how to invest, who is a welder or electrician. So, how do I choose a woman when there is no women to be found? Creating opportunities is also about developing the lesbian culture. I believe that if we can create a true counterculture, which lesbianism is, women will enthusiastically join it. I'm confident that if women have somewhere to go to leave the male culture, they will not want to return to it. Today, we can't confidently say that we have such a culture or a real feminist movement. This is my long term plan. The short term plan is to preserve ourselves, our lesbian ideology and principles, to support each other and to create a lesbian feminist network that excludes liberal collaborationists. Not to let ourselves be assimilated in male political movements in exchange for tiny advancements that will be taken from us in a few years. A lot of feminists worry that they don't do enough and have no right to call themselves feminists. Among ourselves, we joke that at our age, we're supposed to have completed several feminist revolutions. The conditions of our lives have changed a lot since the Western second wave, and now it's important to not give in to the male demand for women's self-sacrifice. Certainly, there are hard times for lesbian feminism, but until we decide to give up, lesbian feminism will live on. Thank you. This is all.
Great. Okay, so we are now going to go to our third speaker, and it's already been unbelievable webinar. I can't believe we're now going to also hear from the co-founder of 1205, which is a new movement that has already done many really successful, significant actions, and is just on a really on a roll, doing a lot of good work. So this is Jean Hatchet, the co-founder of 1205. She's a feminist writer activist. She rides her bike to commemorate the lives of women murdered by men in a domestic context. And she's the co-founder of the new group 1205. So I'll hand over to you to explain and tell us a range of different things that your group's been doing. Thank you so much.
We've got a specific focus on physical protest. So you know, different groups have different methods of putting pressure on regarding our rights as women according to sex. And our method is really to turn up physically wherever we see injustices for women, and where our rights are being attacked by the demand by trans activists for, you know, some of our rights to be relinquished in order to prioritise the rights of men. So we're very clear about our language as well. We do call men men, and a lot of our activism has been based around some of those threats. So we formed as a group to support the German feminist women on the 1st of November, when German self-ID was introduced. There were protests globally, and we organised the one here in the UK. Well, there were two organised in the UK, actually, one in Edinburgh and one in, we organised the one in London. Very, very well attended. Really good day as well. And one of the focuses was bringing different groups of women together, different groups of women's activists together in a collaborative way to stand with German sisters. Beyond that, we thought we'd done pretty well. We were quite happy with the way that had worked, and you know, the way that we invited everybody to take part. And we thought we'd roll the group forward. We didn't quite realise how we would be received, and we're just incredibly grateful to everybody that's been so welcoming of us as a new group. So we then decided we'd look at this injustice that was happening with the Football Association in the UK, where they had banned a young girl, a 17-year-old girl, from her own football team for 6 matches because she called a man a man. A man appeared on the opposite team. He'd got a beard. He said he was a woman. And she said, "Are you a man?" She didn't think he should be there, and she challenged him. Instead of that being seen as an injustice against women, that this man with a beard was pretending to be a woman and turning up in a woman's game and a woman's team, they instead punished her with a really grueling interview. They made her capitulate quite a lot, actually, to account for the language that she'd used, and she was given a 6-match ban. So we decided we would need to support her as women who couldn't be threatened and cowed by this incredibly powerful group. For those of you that don't know, the FA is a very, very powerful footballing body in the UK. Very wealthy, very influential. And so we decided we would turn up and object to what they'd done. And we took a protest to Wembley, which is the home of the FA, but also a really big footballing stadium. And it was really well attended, and we had quite a lot of press there. And that's what we really want to look at, is getting out on the streets and saying, we don't agree with this, we don't think this is right. We banners, leaflets, cards, whatever we need to do, chanting, megaphones, anything that draws the public's attention. And that really has happened rolling forwards, that the public have got really involved with that kind of activism. Just ordinary women, lots of us, you know, middle-aged, because we don't have the same fear that young women have. We can't be sanctioned out of footballing games because we're not there in the first place. So that was really, really well received. The FA didn't back down. There is provision for them to provide single-sex sport at Section 195 of the Equality Act here in the UK, and they chose not to utilise that provision. So they are making a conscious choice to not protect women with the legislation that is afforded to women exactly for that. They choose not to. We think they're wrong. So we then rolled that protest over to another footballing game. We have the Lionesses here, is the women's team in the UK, the English women's team. And we turned up at Sheffield United at their ground when the Lionesses were playing, and we organised again quite a quiet protest this time, because it's the Lionesses are heavily attended by children and parents, and so we're willing to adapt our protest according to the demographic we're looking at. We worked well with the police, we made sure that we were respectful of the people attending, and that's how we aim to work. Anybody can turn up, anybody can support us. We don't ask a lot. Trans activists came and objected, and the police said, would you mind, you know, going around the corner? We'll keep these lot here. They were noisy, they weren't well received by the public. And we said, yeah, of course, we'll move around the corner. And we were well received, and lots of parents came to speak to us. And there was a mum and a young girl stood in front of our banner, said, thank you for what you're doing. I'm so proud, because, you know, she's coming through this quagmire of what might happen to her rights in her footballing game. And so we've got huge public support, and that has been amazing. We then organised a protest against the BBC. They awarded the Women's Footballer of the Year to a man, saying he's a woman, still holding out, still saying he's a woman, and everybody can see with their eyes that that's clearly not the case. And so we organised three protests, sorry. we were quite ambitious. So we organised three separate protests in Glasgow, Salford, outside where the award was taking place, the BBC award, Sports Personality of the Year. And then we organised outside the BBC offices in London as well, outside Broadcasting House. So we had three protests at the same time. Exciting things. We had dinosaurs, you know, banners, women chanting, speaking, singing even. It was, you know, three really fun protests. And that's what we're kind of aiming for. Public outrage that we can carry forwards, that we can show the public what's happening. But the protests themselves are meant to involve as many people as possible. We want to get ever, you know, increasing numbers. And just focus people on these injustices in the most visual way we can. So other people, you know, other women's groups in the UK will target via letter writing or by legal action. You know, all of these things feed into each other. We're just kind of the outrage organisation, I suppose, that we're the ones that are going to bring the public to every issue that we see. We don't really mind going forwards who takes that on beyond us, who drags it over the line and makes sure that becomes policy. We will work with other bodies. We're not aiming to take over from anybody. And we're really enjoying that kind of collaboration as well with other groups. We've got various other group members that sort of turn up into our organising groups and offer us ideas, which we're really welcome. And so one of our things that we've said is, if you are committing an injustice to women, if you are one of the bodies or one of the groups or one of the organisations that are determined to take rights from women in favour of men who say they are women, you can expect us, and we will make noise and we will make life difficult for you, and we will keep doing that. So that's been our message throughout. So we will be continuing to protest the FA. We're going next week to two separate locations where the FA have bases, which is Wembley and St George's Park in Burton-on-Trent. So we're going to try and do different things each time. We're going to do it in lots of different areas. We're going all over the country. So, you know, some things up north, some things down south, some things simultaneously, some things not. So we're kind of, you know, evolving quite creatively at the moment. Got a wonderful team, absolutely amazing team, you know, media strategists. We've got a fabulous publicity experts. All sorts of people are contributing. So the other thing is that we are very, very keen that we are self-funded. So we don't merchandise, we don't take donations, we are doing this ourselves. And largely what we want from people is not their money, we want their time, and we want their physical bodies on the streets, at the side of us, you know, behind a banner, behind a self-made placard, something you run up in your room before you arrive. That's absolutely fine by us. We might not be slick, we do think we're effective. So we do think we're offering something a little bit different. We're moving this forward, we're looking at other things that we can be doing. We've looked at the Women's March is being hard to even explain how ridiculous that is, but there's a Women's March on the 18th of January, and the organising groups are throughout the UK. If you are seen as a TERF, if you get in these organising groups and you ask any questions at all that would suggest that you're a TERF, they throw you out. So our aim is to make our objections to those women being slung out of groups for women's marches in favour of men who say they are women, who demand that we're removed from those groups. So we have plans in progress at the moment to turn up and make ourselves known to those people that we are the women. We will not be thrown off women's marches, and we won't be excluded from things that are supposed to be for women in favour of men. The thing that you really asked me to talk about here today is not one of those things. It's not to do with the demands of trans activist men. It's we felt that we had to do something about the terrible situation for women in Afghanistan. And even though that's not so far been our remit, lots of groups in the UK who have looked at women's sex-based rights are also feeling we cannot watch this. We cannot, there's not a lot we can do. We know that we can't target the Taliban. We know that there's no way that they're going to listen to us no matter what we do. However, we don't think that doing nothing is an option. We have to show solidarity with our sisters in Afghanistan, but also Afghan women globally. And one of the ways that we're looking at the moment is around the cricket. The ICC Championship trophy is going to be including the Afghanistan men's team. There have been numerous calls for a boycott of that tournament, and the English team have rejected that. So the English Cricket Board have said that they will not boycott the match, which is on the 26th of February, is the Afghanistan versus England cricket match. And they've said they won't abandon that. They will turn up and they will play against the men of a regime who are being more brutally oppressive of women than we have seen globally in a very, very, well, if ever, we've seen women be so sanctioned in the way that the Taliban are sanctioning Afghanistan women of Afghanistan, sorry. So whilst we might not be able to do much, we feel that the very least that we can do as an organising group is to turn up and object to that particular match on the 26th of February. So we'll be going to Lords, which is the large cricket ground. It's the home of the English Cricket Board. The English Cricket Board should be putting pressure on the ICC to object to Afghanistan playing. They are they're in conflict with their own criteria for inclusion at this point. The ICC dictate, their own rules dictate that for Afghanistan to compete within international cricket, they must include and promote a similar level of female cricket, a team, and also, developing women's cricket within Afghanistan. Now, currently, the women's cricket team of Afghanistan is in exile. Not only would they not be able to play in Afghanistan, they've had to flee the country. The ICC are not supporting them. They're being funded to some extent by other organisations in Australia, where lots of them are now. But it is ludicrous that the ICC are not applying their own criteria for inclusion. They could exclude Afghanistan. So we think that we should, as a body, call for that exclusion, that they really shouldn't be competing in this championship trophy. So we'll be turning up on the 26th of February. We invite everybody to join us and get down there. We'll reveal locations and details of what we're doing at a later date. What we also would really, really like is if women organise similar protests, whatever form of protest they wish, in their own countries at the time that their nation play Afghanistan, or in support of our protest. So we'll release a number of things that you can do to, you know, that women could do to support us if they want to, holding up pieces of paper with hashtags on, putting things on social media, circulating photographs. There's all kinds of things that we would like people to do at the same time as we protest. We invite as well, and we encourage, and more than happy for everybody to steal our ideas and take them and do things at the same time. They can do them under our banner or not, don't really care. But we urge other women to do the same thing. For example, on the 21st of February, South Africa are playing Afghanistan. It would be really great if South African women did something similar, go to a specific cricket ground and protest there, or, you know, organize something online. We're physical, we like doing that. We'd hope that women would. If women want to do it under the 1205 banner and they want to do that globally and say, we're supporting 1205, you know, knock up some placards with 1205 on, we're happy for you to do that. Take our stuff, use it, take our messages, take our hashtags. Yes, please, you know, help yourselves. We're not you know, we're not protective of what we're doing here. We just want to support those women. We do not, and you know, having said we don't think we can influence the Taliban in any way. What we cannot do is show the Taliban that there is an indifference to the plight of Afghan women. And so we have to do something, however small, however, you know, however little effect it has on the situation there and on that regime. Women are relying on us. Women in Afghanistan and Afghan women globally cannot see us doing nothing. They simply cannot. So, you know, I know lots of women's groups here in the UK are looking at organising something. This is our contribution, and we really hope, you know, that you can get on board in some way and help support us. We wouldn't be doing any of this. Okay, we feel that all of these transgressions against women's rights, especially in the UK, have come from the permission of the Gender Recognition Act. And so we, as a group, we've said we are very, very delighted to welcome WDI UK's attempts to repeal the Gender Recognition Act. As a group, we get fully behind that. And I know, you know, Joe has said that's going to be talked about more, and that's going to be an ongoing thing for WDI. We as a group are fully behind that. And, you know, we applaud your activism in moving that forward. So yeah, join us, get involved with any of these things, or, you know, as many of them as you want. Please join us in the cricket action. We'd really, really appreciate it. And thank you so much for having me here.